Maximian than it had grown accustomed to when Diocletian was around to moderate his vices. Once the Augustus was in hand, Maximian immediately broke the promise he had made and had Severus executed. We don't know exactly how old he was when he died, but Severus had reigned first as Caesar and then as Augustus for just about a year and a half. Now, whether it was the right thing to do is an open question. A good old-fashioned coup usually demands that the old ruler be ruthlessly exterminated, both to prevent him from coming back and to put everyone on notice that you mean business. But in this case, Severus was not the only ruler to be reckoned with, and killing him, especially after having used such a dirty trick to get him in hand, did not exactly make Galerius amenable to Maxentius's demands. Rather, when Galerius heard what had happened, he immediately mustered his own army and marched on Italy. There was going to be hell to pay for the murder of Severus. Facing a war with Galerius, a war that he had hoped to avoid, Maxentius quickly sent emissaries north to meet and haggle with Constantine. Maxentius hoped to bring him over to his side, but barring that, to at least secure Constantine's neutrality in the coming fight. Constantine, again playing the long game, did not jump at the chance to join with Galerius, and instead, his own offer was for neutrality, and neutrality only. The price would be a marriage to Maximian's daughter and Maxentius's sister, Fausta. This would not only strengthen his overall claim to power, after all, he would now be directly tied to the Herculean dynasty, but it would also give him future leverage over Maxentius, should he ever need to leverage Maxentius in the future. The deal struck, Constantine was good to his word, and stayed on the sidelines when Galerius arrived in Italy in the summer of 307. The Eastern Augustus may have been mad as hell, and ready to blow Maximian and Maxentius off the face of the earth, but like Severus, he found this to be nearly impossible. Reinforced by all those troops that had been with Severus initially, Maxentius was now in an even stronger position than he had been before, and this time, the whole of Italy was with him. As soon as he arrived on the peninsula, Galerius found nearly every city shut down, munitions stockpiled behind walls, and hostile locals everywhere harassing his scouts and supply lines. Galerius pressed to within 60 miles of Rome, but was so frustrated in his advance that by the time he neared the city, he was more than ready to come to some sort of agreement with Maxentius, and he sent envoys to Rome to feel the young man out. But Maxentius was not as ready to deal as he had once been. He had bested one Augustus already, and it looked a lot like he was going to do it again. So why deal down? Had he not already proven himself to be the strongest of them all? The envoys were sent back with a no deal. Now just spinning with rage, Galerius found himself in a position similar to Severus. Isolated in enemy territory, his own troops were getting itchy feet, enticed as they were by the lucrative promises Maxentius and his agents had been spreading among them. The Eastern Augustus decided that his only course of action would be a humiliating withdrawal from the peninsula, but he refused to leave empty-handed. His men were clamoring for something to match the rewards promised by Maxentius, and so Galerius, maybe just to spite the Italians, let his men off the leash. They ravaged the countryside, burning and pillaging their way north. It may have felt good, and it may have lined their pockets, but if there was one thing that was going to be true from here on out, it was that Galerius, the senior Augustus of the empire, was now a supremely hated man in Italy and in Rome. So that didn't take too long. Diocletian had retired in May of 305, and by the summer of 307, the Tetrarchy was in shambles. 2 Augusti were dead, one at the hands of an ex-Augustus no less. Constantine had snuck in through the back door, and Maxentius controlled Italy in half capacity. As Galerius sulked his way back to Nicomedia, he tried to figure out how it had all gone so wrong so fast. He thought he had stacked the deck to his advantage, but when the hand played out, he wound up losing half the empire. It just didn't make sense. The only man he could think of who might be able to make sense of it all, and who could maybe figure out a way to get things back on track, was Diocletian, who had so far refused any invitation to get involved. Next time, though, Galerius will finally succeed in convincing Diocletian to temporarily give up his cabbages. The old senior Augustus cannot have been happy with the way things had gone since he retired, and I guess he figured that the time had finally come for him to throw his weight behind some kind of settlement that would get the Tetrarchy working again. I say next time because, unfortunately, there will be no episode next week, but we will be back in 2 weeks to cover the Imperial Summit that will solve all the problems that had cropped up since Diocletian's abdication, and in so doing, create a whole bunch of new ones. This week's episode is brought to you by Audible. As you know, Audible is the internet's leading provider of audio entertainment with over 80,000 titles to choose from. When you're done with this episode, go to audiblepodcast.com/Rome. That again, audiblepodcast.com/Rome. By going to that address, you qualify for a free book download when you sign up for a 14-day trial membership. There is no obligation to continue the service, and you can cancel anytime and keep the free book download. You can also keep going with one of the monthly subscription options and get great deals on all future audiobook purchases. This week, I am going to recommend a book that has been hanging around on the bestseller list for a while now and was recommended by listener Casey, The Big Short by Michael Lewis, which tells the story of the incomprehensible and ultimately insanely destructive world of mortgage-backed securities. I know Lewis just from Moneyball, and so can attest only to the fact that his writing is excellent and that Joe Morgan will probably not read this book either before dismissing it completely. Just remember to go to audiblepodcast.com/Rome so that they know who sent you. Hello, and welcome to the History of Rome. Episode 131, The New Game in Town. Last time, we left off with the Tetrarchy in general disarray. Maxentius had revolted, Severus was dead at the hands of Maximian, Galerius had been forced to slink out of Italy, and up in the north, Constantine was just sort of lurking ominously. The only members of the Imperial Brotherhood who remained untouched by the events of the last 2 years were the retired Diocletian, who is about to get dragged back into all this, and the Eastern Caesar Maximinus Daia, who is himself about to become quite disgruntled. At this point, it might not have been clear to all the players that the game had changed, but they were about to learn pretty quick that the Tetrarchy was no longer an end unto itself. It was now simply a means to an end. In other words, getting into the Tetrarchy was not important because it makes you part emperor. It was important because it was the only way to qualify for the championship round. And I think we all know that the prize for winning the championship round was sole control of the Roman Empire. So I hope everyone is ready to keep up with the rapid-fire horse trading, alliance hopping, and double-crossing that is about to go down in pursuit of the championship, because I can tell you one thing for sure. Constantine is. You'll recall from last week that as Maxentius was preparing Italy for the imminent invasion of Galerius, he managed to secure an alliance with Constantine that would keep the newly minted Caesar out of the fighting. I mentioned that the key to this alliance was a marriage to Maxentius' sister Fausta, but I forgot to mention the other key part of the bargain. With Severus dead, the Western Augustus slot was open, and Constantine demanded that the ex-emperor Maximian use his prestige to unilaterally promote his soon-to-be son-in-law to the position. Maxentius and his father agreed to the terms, and in the summer of 307, probably not long after Galerius' withdrawal from Italy, though I'm not sure about that, a ceremony unfolded that saw Maximian hand Constantine first his daughter in marriage, and then the title Augustus. Though Constantine's promotion was essentially self-proclaimed, there was no one around to stop him, and, unlike the last time this happened, when he ultimately accepted demotion to Caesar, this time around, and for the rest of his life, Constantine never would give up the title Augustus. For the briefest of moments, even though the western and eastern halves of the empire were at each other's throats, on either side of the divide there was relative peace. But that too was about to fall apart. In the west, it seems that Maximian had for a while now been making the rather bold assumption that now that he was back, he was back. Senior Augustus, superior in rank and prestige to Constantine and Maxentius, the whole bit. But Maxentius, finally coming into his own, had no intention of ceding any real authority to his father. As far as Maxentius was concerned, Maximian was a relic. A useful relic, but a relic nonetheless. 307-308, Maxentius and his father Maximian resided together in Rome, and when they discovered the assumptions the other things came to a head in the spring, when Maximian got up in front of the troops and publicly denounced his own son, going so far as to physically wrestle off Maxentius's purple cloak. But Maxentius had spread the wealth around generously, and the troops in Italy were his to a man now, and they did not take kindly to this old has-been manhandling their new, and did I mention generous, benefactor. His denunciation backfiring completely, Maximian fled the city, and with nowhere else to go, headed for Nicomedia, where he hoped, get this, that Galerius would take him in. With his father out of the way, Maxentius probably hoped things would calm down a bit. But almost as soon as the old man was gone, word came up to Rome that Domitius Alexander, the vicar of Africa, had himself proclaimed emperor by the troops at Carthage, a proclamation that had apparently been sparked after Maxentius demanded Alexander send a son to Rome to act as a hostage. This was bad news for Maxentius, as North Africa was the source of Italy's grain supply. But for the moment, there was nothing he could do about it. He couldn't turn away from the main game with Galerius just yet. But once he was legitimated within the Tetrarchy, which is something Maxentius no doubt expected straight away, he would deal with Alexander. Back in Nicomedia, Galerius was still fuming over his forced retreat when Maximian suddenly appeared on his doorstep. It is kind of surprising that the Eastern Augustus did not just have the old man executed straight away for killing his Western counterpart, but Galerius checked his wrath, and instead granted Maximian asylum. At this point, it is likely that Galerius knew what he wanted his next move in the game to be, and realized that Maximian could be useful. Because the next move Galerius wanted to make was convince Diocletian to come out of retirement and help him resettle the political order. Galerius made